back in person here at the Four Seasons. We're delighted to see you all again, and thank you so much for being here. We're just really happy to see you. So please go ahead and finish your coffee and dessert as we get started. I'm Rick Kapler, president of the Media Institute, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you to our June Communications Forum Luncheon, which is our first in-person event since March of 2020, if you can believe that. So we have a terrific program for you today with NTIA Administrator Alan Davidson. But before we get into our fireside chat, I'd like to share a couple of items with you. First, I'd like to thank you, our wonderful luncheon sponsors, for staying flexible and adapting with us during the last 2 years of virtual luncheons. I think that worked out really well, and it was a whole new learning experience for all of us. And I certainly appreciate your confidence and the support you gave us as we took on that new challenge. And as you came into the room here today, I hope you picked up a copy of the new book by our distinguished fellow Stuart Brotman, titled The First Amendment Lives On, which features interviews that Stuart conducted with modern First Amendment legends like Floyd Abrams and Bob Corn Revere. And Bob is actually here in the room today. We have a legend with us. This book is our little gift to welcome you back here in person today. So I invite you to please pick up a copy on your way out if you don't have one already. Now, on a related note, next Tuesday, June 21st, there will be a special reception and book signing event with Stuart at the National Press Club in DC to celebrate the publication of this book. It will take place in the 4th Estate Room from 5:30 to 7 p.m., and it will be hosted by Bob Corn Revere and Christy Hefner. If you'd like to attend this reception, please let me know, and I'd be delighted to send you an invitation. That's Tuesday, it's coming Tuesday, June 21st. And finally, our next luncheon event will be on Tuesday, July 26th. It will feature Kathy Grillo, Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Government Affairs at Verizon. This will be a virtual event because we're going to try to ease back into a mix of in-person and virtual events for the rest of the year. So plan to join us online with Kathy Grillo on July 26th. It's now my very great pleasure to welcome our distinguished guest. Alan Davidson holds 2 titles: Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information, and Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Secretary Davidson is an Internet expert, policy expert, with over 20 years of experience as an executive, public interest advocate, technologist, and attorney. He was most recently a senior advisor at the Mozilla Foundation, a global nonprofit that promotes openness, innovation, and participation on the internet. He was previously Mozilla's Vice President of Global Policy, Trust, and Security, where he led public policy and privacy teams promoting open internet and a healthy web. Alan also served in the Obama-Biden administration as the first director of digital economy at the U.S. Department of Commerce. He started Google's public policy office in Washington, leading their government relations and policy efforts in North and South America for 7 years until 2012. Secretary Davidson has been a longtime leader in the internet nonprofit community, serving as director of New America's Open Technology Institute, where he worked to promote equitable broadband access and adoption. As Associate Director of the Center for Democracy and Technology, Alan was an advocate for civil liberties and human rights online in some of the earliest internet policy debates. He's a graduate of MIT and the Yale Law School and has been the administrator of NTIA since mid-January of this year. So, let's jump right in. Secretary Davidson, welcome. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you. And congratulations on getting, we call it, back to the office. And to the Media Institute for its continuing legacy of leadership on all these issues. I do remember the last time I was at a Media Institute, and I believe I was in black tie. So I'm told that's coming back. My first event this year was with Bob Corn here, so thank you for sponsoring me way back when.
So we're great. So glad to have you here today. And let me ask, it's been a busy few months since you've been at NTIA, so let me just start by asking, how's it been going?
We've been busy. It's great. I'll say, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And it is great to be able to talk about what we're up to at NTIA. I knew that it was going to be a challenging and exciting opportunity, and it has lived up to that billing. We have a lot on our plate, probably more than maybe NTIA has ever had. It starts with this historic opportunity that we've been given around broadband. Thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've got serious money to give out, $48 billion in grant money and other programs too, to connect everybody in America. So no pressure there, but that's our top priority right now. But obviously we have other things, other missions. We serve as the president's, by statute, we serve as the president's advisor on telecommunications and information policy. That means that in addition to the work we're doing on broadband, we have a huge role in spectrum work, spectrum coordination, spectrum management on the federal, among the federal programs, also making sure that we're meeting the commercial needs of the spectrum, for spectrum. We're doing a ton of work in our policy portfolio. We do a lot of work at the ITU. We're doing work on privacy. We've got a competition homework assignment from the White House right now. We're doing work on cybersecurity, Open RAN and 5G, vendor diversity. FirstNet is in our portfolio, supporting public safety communications, supporting our first responders out there. So it's a very full plate right now, but also honestly like a very exciting time. And probably one of the most wonderful things for me has been the staff that's there. I was really just so pleased and impressed to see the level of energy and dedication among the team that's been there for many years, deeply expert in these issues, and I think themselves really excited about the historic opportunity for us right now.
Well, you do have a full plate, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Why don't we just jump right into broadband, since that's the big item here. You know, certainly you've been in the spotlight lately because NTIA has been given the task of distributing these billions of dollars in broadband funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And last month, NTIA launched the Internet for All initiative. And of course, the biggest part of that initiative is called the Broadband Equity Access and Employment Program, known as the BEAD program, and that will distribute $42.5 million in itself. So how are things progressing? Are the states and other stakeholders meeting your expectations?
Well, it's going really well, and I'll say, just to step back, a half step on, we have been talking about the digital divide in this country for over 20 years, 25 years. We've known this day was coming, where the internet was going to become such an essential part of life that if you aren't able to meaningfully connect and be online, you couldn't thrive in the digital economy. And COVID has, of course, just brought that home for all of us, that you can't, how can you work in the modern economy, learn in the modern economy, be connected to healthcare, be connected to justice without meaningful internet access? We've been talking about this for over 20 years, and finally, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law and other funding out there, we've been given this historic opportunity to really do something about it, to really make structural change here and connect everybody in America. And I joke that no pressure, but it is a historic moment for us. And I think that's the context that we're looking at all this in. And I will also say that, I think about it like, generations before us, connected rural America with water and electricity. They built the interstate highway system. This is our generation's infrastructure project, right? This is our chance to build something that's going to connect everybody meaningfully with the modern economy. So it's really an all hands on deck moment for us, but for all the other people we need to work with. So as you said, we've been given this money, these big grant programs, $42 billion in our state grant program. We have a big middle mile program, $1 billion middle mile program, a $3 billion digital equity program, $3 billion for tribal grants. So there's a lot of pieces to this. The key first step for us was getting these big notices out that we just published a few weeks ago, launching the Internet for All program. And now the next step is getting states on board to say that they're going to be part of it. And so far the progress has been pretty good. We've got 39 of the states and territories, 39 out of 56 have submitted letters of intent as of today to be part of the BEAD program. That's our big milestone, our big metric right now. We've got to get all 56 on board, but so far so good. And I think they see the opportunity here, and that's what's exciting too.
Just come back to the digital divide for a moment. We know that affordability is the key issue in closing the digital divide. How are you ensuring that this new connectivity is going to be affordable?
Well, affordability is it's not a luxury; it's a necessity in this program, right? We can build a connection to somebody's home, but if they can't afford to get online, it doesn't do that person, that family, very much good. And so Congress saw this in the law that we're implementing, the bipartisan infrastructure law. The first line of our section speaks to the need to build affordable, reliable, high-speed internet for everybody. And so we're taking affordability seriously. And there's three ways we do it in our notice here that we put out. One is there's something called a low-cost option. So this is the requirement that everybody who gets federal funding has to have an option, a low-cost option for low-income Americans. We give states a fair amount of flexibility about how they're going to implement that, and we give some examples in our notice, but I think there'll be a lot of different approaches. The second thing we do is we've said affordability has to be a component of how states give out grants, that has to be consideration in when they do the grant making. And then the third thing we did is we speak to the idea of a middle-class affordability option and the notion of that working families also need to have some measure of affordability. We're quite open to how states can implement that we've seen lots of different ways that states might do it. Different states might approach it with a subsidy. Some states might try to lean in on that affordability criteria. They might be able to do things structurally, but we want them to show us how they're taking affordability seriously for working families in addition to the lowest income Americans. So that's our approach on affordability.
Early in the rollout process, you said that NTIA would not be taking a one-size-fits-all approach in giving money to the states for the broadband build-outs. And I think you touched on that, but you also said you take a customer service approach. What do you mean by a customer service approach?
Well, there's two pieces to this. So first of all, it starts with the fact that states are our critical partners here. So with our biggest funding, we give money to the states then be doing the grant making. Sort of a little bit of a bank shot, but there was real intent behind this on the part of Congress, which is to say, we know that the needs of the different states have very different needs. What Rhode Island needs in this program is very different than what Montana or Alaska or New Mexico need. And so the idea is to really give flexibility to the states to build the programs that they need. They know best what their needs are going to be. So we've leaned into that a lot in this notice. In making that work, I think one of the biggest things that we talked about, and Secretary Raimondo, my Secretary of Commerce, who is a former governor herself, looked at this and said, the most important thing we do is really support the states. We know that states are going to be in really different situations, and some states are very sophisticated, have big broadband offices already, been thinking about this problem for years. Other states are just getting involved, and so the customer service approach, which was really, I think, the Secretary's idea, and actually sort of started. I see my predecessor in the seat, Evelyn Romali, is here, our former acting administrator at NTIA, really got this rolling, is to hire a group of people at NTIA who are going to be working directly with the state. So every state has a point of contact that they know they can reach, and there's somebody at NTIA who wakes up every day thinking, how do I make sure Montana is succeeding? So that's what we're building, and so far so good.
Now, I know last week NTIA faced some pushback from members of the Senate Commerce Committee in a hearing over a number of aspects of your broadband funding rollout for the B program.
It was great fun.
And there was some concern on a couple of issues, broadband rate regulation and net neutrality, that maybe some of the language in those grant requirements might be backdoor attempts to implement state-level rate regulation or bring back net neutrality. What would you say about that?
They're not. Probably the simplest thing. I think, talking about rates, it's no secret that we believe that affordability, I just said it, the statute speaks to affordability. We're very clear about affordability. But if you look at this is really using states as a laboratory of democracy. There's going to be a lot of flexibility for how states do this. there's no place in that, we talk a lot about affordability, but there's no place in this, in our notices that we set a rate, set a price for any broadband service. So I think we feel really comfortable on this and on the net neutrality issue that we've been completely faithful both to the letter and also the intent of the statute.
But there are also some strong concerns that from Congress that NTIA has to rely on the FCC's broadband coverage maps. And that these FCC maps are riddled with errors and might end up wasting billions of dollars in this funding. How will NTIA deal with the map issue?
The map issue is a critical issue. It's an absolutely critical issue. And I think we have not been well served in the past by not having good maps. And if we're going to spend this money wisely, we need to make sure we're spending it in the right places. I sort of joke, $42 billion doesn't go as far as it used to. But when you take the money that we have on the other programs at the FCC and Treasury, we do really feel this desire to make sure we're connecting everybody in America. And if we're going to do that, we have to really be wise stewards of the money. The maps in the past did not give us the kind of granular look that we need at where people are unserved in America first and foremost. The new maps that the FCC is creating, we're confident they're going to be, in the long run, they are going to be much better than what we've had before. They're at that much more granular level, location by location, not census block by census block, for example. It's going to take a little while to get there, and it's a lot of work for them to build this. So we are in very, very close communication with the FCC over this issue. I will just say, for any of you who are providers out in the room or in touch with providers out in the room who have to provide data back to the FCC, I would just say we're counseling providers. The number one thing that we would ask is that we are asking everybody is get that data into the FCC quickly. They're opening up their data call for the mapping data starting July 1st. I think the faster they get the data, the faster they can see, they can plug it into the map, make sure that the maps are as good as can be, and get that first draft of the map out early in the fall so that folks can look at it and figure out how to make sure that it's the good map that we need to do the work.
Okay. Let's move to spectrum issues now. NTIA manages the federal government's use of spectrum through activities like assigning frequencies and maintaining spectrum use databases. In February, NTIA and the FCC announced a new initiative to improve the U.S. government coordination on spectrum management. Can you update us on that program?
Yes, so first of all, I mean, this is another hugely, incredibly important area that we work in. I think a lot of us probably in this room appreciate what an incredibly important and scarce resource spectrum is, and we have a dual hat at NTIA. We are the manager and coordinator of federal spectrum usage. But we also, as the president's advisor on these issues, we take seriously and have an imperative to think about the commercial needs for spectrum and making sure that we have a pipeline of spectrum that's available for commercial use so that we maintain our leadership and our competitiveness in the world and provide people with the services that they know and love online in the wireless space. So we take those dual purposes, those dual imperatives very seriously. I think a key starting point for us in that is making sure we're coordinating very well with the key other agencies that are involved in this, and particularly with the FCC. So as you say, one of the first things that I did, actually I say my first day in the office, I spoke with the chairwoman at the FCC, and we've been in very close contact on a lot of issues very regularly, very, very regularly ever since, which is great. One thing we launched in February was what we call our Spectrum Coordination Initiative. So it was a pledge that we were going to work together very closely, regular meetings, exchange of technical experts on our advisory committees, working together on the spectrum strategy, and working to update our memorandum of understanding about how we operate together. And the good news is that's been going very well. And I think the teams are working together really nicely. Everybody gets along. And we have just spoken, actually, the chairwoman and I, just before my hearing, and agreed that we would have an update of this MOU in place by the end of next month. So we're making progress, which is great.
One of the elements of that initiative you just mentioned was the National Spectrum Strategy. What do you foresee as being critical elements necessary to develop a national spectrum strategy?
Well, it's interesting. We're excited about the National Spectrum Strategy, and I should say Secretary Raimondo at the Commerce Department talks about it all the time. It makes me very nervous, actually, because she talks about it all the time. When is it going to be ready? And I think it's something that if we do it right, is actually going to take a few months to do, because what we really want to do is bring in a broad set of stakeholders and look to the future and think about, to borrow Wayne Gretzky hockey saying, don't skate to where the puck is now, skate to where the puck is going. So I think especially in spectrum strategy, as we're thinking about the road ahead, we need to be listening to industry about where its needs are, what it's going to need, thinking about the federal missions and what those needs are going to look like. And then I think there's three components we're really eager to have be a part of this strategy. One is real clear mechanism for coordination around the federal government. I know it's not sexy work, it's not fun, but it's actually the stuff that makes it so that we don't have big blow-ups around issues like some of the recent issues that we've had in the space. The second is just evidence and science-based approaches to all these issues. So we've had real disagreements within the federal community, for example, about spectrum interference. We need like a common understanding with industry about how we should measure these things. I think science can help us a lot here. I know it sounds very basic, but it's actually important. And then the third thing is to lean into new technologies, especially around issues like spectrum sharing or use of innovative parts of the spectrum. Like the low-hanging fruit is gone in this space. I don't need to tell probably a lot of folks in this room, like, if we're going to make progress in this space, we're going to have to think about new ways of doing business. New technologies, fortunately, are showing us the way when we think about spectrum sharing as a good example of making more efficient use of spectrum. So those are the big components we're excited to work on. It's a lot. Some of it's a little boring, but it's not. It's actually very important.
Speaking of coordination, there's been some language floating around Capitol Hill which would allow the Department of Defense to bypass NTIA when it came to following practices for federal spectrum allocation and management. That sounds like a counterproductive force at work here.
That's very diplomatic of you. I'll try to be diplomatic as well. It would be counterproductive. I was just saying that part of how we need to improve the situation is to be well coordinated at the federal level. And creating a system where every agency went off on its own, developed its own approach to spectrum, made its own strategy about how it was going to use spectrum, that's not a recipe for the kind of coordination that we need. And I think there are better paths forward. And I will say we are actually working a very, very good working relationship with my counterparts at the Defense Department. We work on issues together all the time. So I'm hopeful that we'll find a better way forward and ensure that we're all rowing in the same direction.
Let's turn to privacy.
Yeah.
Although many bills have been proposed over the last decade, so far we've not been able to pass federal privacy reform legislation to both better protect individuals and to give businesses some regulatory clarity and stability. What are the administration's priorities in this area?
Well, I think the administration has been pretty clear that it supports, well, first of all, I just say privacy is obviously essential in the modern digital age. And we do hear stories all the time. Sort of every week there's something else in the newspaper that makes you uncomfortable about the lack of guardrails at times around how data is being collected and used. And we just need good rules of the road. I think a lot of people understand that and believe that. There's a lot of members of people in the industry who feel also we just need to create good rules of the road that people can build to that. I also say, like, we lose our leadership internationally when we don't have good rules of the road here. And I see this a lot already in speaking to my counterparts around the world. And there was a reason that the GDPR, the European privacy law, is now a law that is a template for a lot of other countries because we've not put our own template out there. So the administration, I think, has been clear that it believes that we need to do more on privacy. This showed up in the competition executive order last summer, talking about privacy. The FTC is leaning into doing a lot more on privacy. The president talked about children's privacy in the State of the Union. And so I would just say we stand ready to try to help with those efforts on Capitol Hill, where there is, it seems, progress being made towards legislation in this area. In the meantime, at NTIA, we've got a project going on right now around privacy, equity, and civil rights. And it's an area where I think we can make a contribution. We look at the policy aspects of this. We're not the regulator here, but looking at the policy aspects of privacy, and really, we just put out we did a listening session. We're about to put out a request for comments on this work that we're doing, and ultimately we're going to paper on that.
Thinking about federal privacy reform legislation, do you think it would be necessary to have an element of state preemption in there, so we don't have a lot of state privacy laws competing, making a sort of muddying up that space as opposed to one federal overview?
Better for me not to get too into the details that are being negotiated on Capitol Hill around this, but certainly an impetus for this is to have a federal standard so that everybody in America has some baseline privacy protections regardless of where they live. It shouldn't matter that cross state lines from the district to Virginia or Maryland. That shouldn't change the kind of privacy that I have online.
Mm-hmm. In terms of internet policy, we talked about privacy here, but what is NTIA doing in terms of reviewing other top digital issues like cybersecurity and global free flow of information?
We've got a big agenda in that space, and I would say when we talk about the international dimensions, that's a big area of interest for us right now. We just had a group that came back from the big development conference at the International Telecommunications Union as an example. I think we see in areas like cybersecurity, in areas like some of these internet policy issues, where we need to make sure that we're promoting our American vision of what free and open, private and secure communications networks should look like, both whether it be on the internet and other communications networks. And we just, for example, we're part of signing the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, which has a kind of very grand sound to it, but I think is a very important set of 60 plus countries that signed on to a common understanding of what we're trying to build out in the, like I say, this private, secure, free and open communications network. I mentioned our engagement at the ITU. I think we have in some ways for too long sort of deferred in our leadership efforts in some of these standards bodies. And our adversaries, countries like China and Russia, have really stepped in and filled that void. So we are internationally really trying to lean in and up our game. One of the things, for example, that we're doing is trying to get an American, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, elected to be the Secretary General of the ITU this year. I think that will make a huge difference. Be a very important thing to get done, and I know folks here have been supportive of that, and I hope, fingers crossed, in September we'll get that done.
What's at stake in that election?
It's a great credit. It's I was saying the ITU has an outsized role in a lot of ways in setting telecommunication standards, but it also could be, if we're not careful, a venue for things that we, engagement on issues that we don't think where it's the right venue. So, for example, a lot of internet standards were developed through the multi-stakeholder process. We have ICANN that does work on the domain name system. Those are much better processes, we think. The multi-stakeholder processes, industry-led processes, those are the right kinds of venues for those kinds of standards. And we've seen efforts at places like the ITU, led in some ways by authoritarian countries like China or Russia, to use the ITU as a venue to pull those standards out of the multi-stakeholder process. We think that would be a huge mistake. So far, we've managed to avoid that. But as we look to the future, we want to make sure that the ITU is a force for good, as we see it, and having someone like Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who's got years of experience at the ITU and is running against her opponent is Russian. And it's a former Huawei executive, Chinese internet telecom company. I think the choice is going to be pretty clear, and we think it's very important that Doreen win.
You mentioned China as a nation that raises both economic and security concerns. What is NTIA's role in the U.S.'s evolving relationship with China?
Well, I think it's not a surprise that we watch with great concern how China is approaching some of these issues. I think when you look at the grand sweep of issues facing us, there's really a struggle between open and closed societies about what kinds of networks we're going to build, what kind of communications we're going to have, what kinds of economies we're going to have. And there's a lot of work across the administration thinking about China. We are involved with pieces of this. I mentioned our work at the ITU and other standards bodies to counter that more authoritarian approach to some of these issues. We're also thinking about cybersecurity quite a bit. And so another example where we're quite engaged is around 5G vendor diversity and security. So we've been quite concerned about Chinese equipment makers in this space. And one thing we're really working on is trying to make sure there's a diversity of vendors in the 5G space. So promoting Open RAN and other open technologies, open standards that will allow new competitors to come in and challenge some of those Chinese equipment makers. So those are some of the kinds of things we're involved in, and I think it's actually quite important for our country, for the world.
Let's just touch on one more issue, competition, or maybe a lack of competition in the mobile app market, which is receiving a lot of competition, or a lot of attention lately. And once John Oliver talks about it, then everybody's talking about it. In fact, one of the terms we've been hearing lately is mobile app ecosystem. And can you tell us what this is about, and what is NTIA doing to assess the level of competition in the mobile app ecosystem?
Well, this administration is very clear that it believes that we need to really be looking in a clear-eyed way at competition across our economy and be doing more to make sure we're promoting competition. The internet space is clearly a part of that. There was an executive order on competition last summer issued by the White House, and we at NTIA, the Commerce Department, got a little homework assignment there, which was to produce a study on the competition in that mobile app ecosystem. And that's really looking at the apps that we all know and love on our phones, for example, the app stores that we use to get those applications run usually by Apple or by Google, and looking at the barriers to entry, the burdens that developers may sometimes face in this space. And again, we are not the regulator here, but we've been asked to think about policy and make recommendations around policy. So we put out a request for comment. We got over 150 comments in just recently. We're going through those now, and we'll have a report. We'll have a first draft report to the White House this summer. And I do think we're really keenly interested in this space and the questions of things like, we build a general purpose computer. We all have desktop computers that you can load any software on. They work fairly securely. What is different about the mobile platform that requires these different approaches? And we've gotten some really good answers and good responses to our questions, and we'll be looking at, stay tuned for more. Watch this space.
Okay, well, the time has flown by, but I want to leave some time for audience questions. So why don't we stop our discussion here and open it up to the floor for questions? Everybody?
Hey, Margaret McGill. Oh, you were calling on me,
Margaret?
right? Yes, okay, I thought so. I thought I got that point, right? Okay. Margaret McGill with Axios. Thank you guys for doing this. It's so nice to see everybody in person. I wanted to ask about the C-band 5G airport apocalypse 2.0 issue. We don't want to go through what we went through in January, again in July. At the federal government level, I know you talked about coordinating more with the FCC. I'm wondering if you could get just a touch more specific on what is happening at the government level to avert that this time around.
Well, it's a great question. I think it goes right back to starting point to say that the need for better coordination among all involved here. And the fact is we really do need to make sure that our federal missions are met. In this case, making sure that there's a real aviation safety. Obviously, we cannot ignore that. It's extremely important. At the same time, we want to make sure we protect the commercial uses and also the integrity of our auction process, right? That we went through an auction. People spent billions of dollars. We need to be really aware of that too. And so, in some ways, it is an example of what happens if we don't do that coordination right. And the fact that my mom knows what spectrum is in this case not a good thing. I would just say, I don't have a lot to report here other than to say that we know that there are a lot of conversations going on, as folks are aware. There was an agreement reached in January to work on this issue, a moratorium as it were, on certain deployments until early July. We're following it quite closely. I think the Department of Transportation has been heavily engaged with the affected carriers, and I think the wireless providers. And I think all I can say is I think everybody would like to make sure that we avoid the kind of problem that we had at the beginning of the year. And so there's keen interest across the administration making sure we do that.
Questions? Yes, Lynn.
You had said at the Senate hearing regarding the Buy American provision for the broadband grants, which you thought that the standard for a waiver, the waiver should be rare, and then the later bench said that the bar should be high. And I'm just wondering if you could fill in anything in there. Are we talking about there is no American provider of the equipment, or the American provider is backed up for a year, or it's just going to cost so much that it makes no economic sense to buy American? Where is that line being drawn?
Those are exactly the things that people are looking at. And just to kind of level set the issue, of course, is that there are in the infrastructure bill that was passed strong Buy America provisions, provisions that are there for a very important reason, right? This was, in addition, especially in the broadband space, it's not just a connectivity bill. This is a bill to promote jobs, good paying, safe jobs for American workers. It's a bill to support American manufacturing in this space. So we are very keen, and Secretary Raimondo has said that we are going to be enforcing these provisions because they serve a very important purpose. But there are waiver provisions in them. And we do know that there are times, and particularly we see this in telecommunications networks, where waivers are needed for just the reasons that you said. And I will say that this is an active area of conversation right now. We are going to be following the guidance that we get from the White House, from OMB about these waivers. And I think people are looking to those very factors that you've indicated, but I don't have a definitive list to give you today about what it is. I think I'll just say directionally, it's those kinds of evidentiary things that we're going to have to show, and we're going to have to show it in a way that basically, like, the waivers will be, the bar for the waivers will be high, they'll be narrow, but we're fairly certain there will be waivers in narrow circumstances where it's called.
Thank you. Please join me in a round of applause for us. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us today. Great insights, great information you've given us. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to see you all. It's great to see so many friends. And it is a historic moment, so we really do want to work with you all on these big projects. Thanks.
Thank you again to our sponsors. We'll see you back online July 26th at Patty Grillo. Thank you.